For a year and a half now, we have seen Trump's allies grasp at straws in their attempts to go after Trump's perceived enemies. They raided a man's house in the middle of the night, publicly accused him of being part of the deep state, and charged him with felony assault, all because he threw a Subway sandwich at a federal agent. Remember that? I mean, that's obviously hardly a deadly weapon. Prosecutors tried to claim that the agent could feel the impact of the sandwich through his bulletproof vest. They indicted former FBI Director James Comey on charges of threatening the president's life just because Comey posted a photo of seashells on Instagram. They've accused a whole list of Trump's perceived enemies of mortgage fraud for doing something multiple of Trump's own cabinet members have done themselves and which Trump has done himself. If it weren't so serious, it would all be pretty freaking laughable. And now tonight, Trump's allies are yet again grasping at straws. This time in an attempt to gin up something they could try to use against former special counsel Jack Smith. Because tonight, and as I noted, this literally just broke, the Republican chairman of the House Judiciary Committee filed a formal criminal referral, the letter right here, asking acting Attorney General Todd Blanche to prosecute Jack Smith on the very flawed premise that he lied to Congress. And that was first reported by Fox News because, well, of course it was. But we here at MS Now have now obtained the referral ourselves, and the logic undergirding this referral doesn't actually make much sense. It's weedy and technical and confusing, and that might be the point. Because if all you know is that a member of Congress is saying Jack Smith lied to them, that certainly sounds bad. But when you look at the details here, they don't really seem to add up. And luckily for us, Republican Senator Josh Hawley explained the GOP's logic on all this just last week when he was trying to get Blanche to prosecute Jack Smith for it. Now, just to show you how ridiculous this all is, how much this is yet again the GOP grasping at straws, let me just break down what Hawley's argument was. For almost a year now, Republicans have been trying to say that Jack Smith broke the law by obtaining the phone records of members of Congress while he was investigating January 6th. In reality, all Smith did was subpoena what are known as toll records, which are essentially logs showing when calls were made, but not their content. It's kind of like your phone bill. It just shows who you called and when. We've talked about this, by the way, on this show before because this is so absurd. So he subpoenaed the toll records of lawmakers who interacted with Trump around the time of January 6, 2021, because wouldn't you want to know that information if you're overseeing an investigation? But he couldn't see what they were saying in those communications. He just knew who called who when. Now, Republicans are trying to conflate those subpoenaed toll records of members of Congress with this, because last week, Republican Senator Chuck Grassley released documents showing that Jack Smith's January 6 investigation had also obtained text messages from 44 lawmakers. Republicans have been trying to act like that is a huge scandal. But here's the thing. Smith obtained those texts because he asked the National Archives for records from the White House from around the time of January 6th. Again, if you're investigating this, wouldn't you want to have those? And it turns out a lot of people in the White House were texting with members of Congress. So Republicans are trying to conflate the toll records and these texts from the White House obtained from the National Archives to try to pretend that Jack Smith lied to Congress, to try to prosecute Jack Smith for lying to Congress. And again, here was Senator Hawley last week trying to show what he asserted was a moment in which Jack Smith lied.
Here is a record, I'm going to read it to you, a record of Jack Smith's responses under oath now to members of Congress. He is asked, question, as it relates to members and their staffs and senators, it's just the toll records as far as you remember. Smith, that is my recollection.
Now, the gotcha that Hawley is going for here is that he is trying to say that Jack Smith lied to Congress by saying that the only communications of members of Congress he subpoenaed were the toll records. But that is the truth. He didn't subpoena any text messages from any member of Congress. He got texts of White House officials from the National Archives. And surprise, surprise, everyone, people in the White House text people in Congress. Now, the biggest reach they are making is that they are conveniently ignoring the full text of what Jack Smith actually told them in his deposition. They are just trying to twist his words so it seems like he is lying when he isn't. I mean, here was the section of Jack Smith's deposition that Hawley presented last week like it was some sort of a smoking gun. To make it clear as day, we are going to put the actual text of what Jack Smith said in his deposition up next to Hawley so you can just see what he left out. watch as he just conveniently skips over the fact that Smith was answering a question specifically just about the toll records.
Question: did the records that you requested include the content of text messages? Smith: answer, no. Now, maybe there's some nuance I'm missing here.
Actually, I think there is quite a bit of nuance you were missing there, Senator Hawley. And while Jim Jordan's new criminal referral gives the actual full quote of what Smith said, this is still spin. It's still grasping at straws. Jordan writes tonight that they believe Smith's answer to Congress were, quote, half-truths. I'd say that the real half-truth appears to be this criminal referral itself. In a statement tonight reacting to Jim Jordan's flimsy criminal referral, representatives for former special counsel Jack Smith said, quote, the referral is made not because Mr. Smith made a false statement, which the letter concedes, but because he did not proactively disclose information that was not responsive to a question asked. This referral reflects a chilling eagerness to weaponize the justice system by attacking a career, nonpartisan public servant who faithfully and fearlessly performed his duties by following the facts and the law. Joining me now is MS Now Justice and Intelligence correspondent Ken Delaney. And again, we just got this letter. Ken's very smart. He's been reading over it. Let me just start by asking you, Ken, we tried to do our best summary there. What do you make of what Jordan is alleging in this referral?
Look, and this is not a partisan statement. I'm a reporter, Jen. This doesn't pass the laugh test. This is such a stretching of the facts here. Let me just read you a response that I got from Jamie Raskin, the ranking Democrat on the Judiciary Committee. He says, in part, this referral, if ever brought by a judge, will get laughed out of court. But success on the merits is not the goal. It is meant to harass Jack Smith. It's meant to please their Fox News viewership. It's meant to whitewash their own participation in a scheme to overthrow our elections. Look, the bottom line is you can't charge somebody for lying because they weren't asked the right question. Now, maybe we all wish, maybe Jack Smith wishes that he had amended or added to his answer about the toll records. And by the way, I'm not saying that we didn't obtain any text messages throughout the investigation relating to members of Congress. And maybe he didn't even remember because this was not a significant part of the investigation. As you said, this was a subpoena to the National Archives for White House records. And in those White House records were contained text messages from members of Congress. And there's a whole procedure that prosecutors have to go through when they're figuring out whether they can review any records related to Congress, because there is a legislative privilege. There's a speech and debate clause. And the Smith team went through all of that. Jack Smith talked about that under oath. He said he followed all the Justice Department guidelines related to that. And you can argue about whether they went too far, whether they played fast and loose. But the idea that Jack Smith intentionally lied under oath based on this set of facts is just ridiculous. And Jamie Raskin is right. This will get laughed out of court. Now, the thing we have to be concerned about here is we've seen this movie before. The Justice Department has charged James Comey with lying in a very similar set of circumstances for statements that don't really track a question that was rather confusing. And so it would not surprise me, actually, if this Justice Department ended up charging Jack Smith. But if they do, that will be a ridiculous moment in American history, Jen.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about in terms of kind of what happens here. I mean, this to me feels like a big PR play, right? It's, you know, they want to get attention. They want to throw in some credibility. Jack Smith just did an hour-long interview with our colleague Nicole Wallace a few weeks ago. Doesn't seem like a coincidence to me. Who knows? I would also know that one of the documents that Senator Chuck Grassley released last week showed that Smith's team discussing sending the lawmakers' texts they got from the White House and National Archives to Trump's defense attorneys years ago. As in, Chuck Grassley released documents acknowledging that this wasn't a secret, this was known, just like the toll records were known because they were literally in the report that was released by Jack Smith. Maybe people didn't read the report. But what do you think this is all about? I mean, is it a PR game? Is it more than that? Is it trying to take Jack Smith off the board? What is it about?
It's certainly a PR game, and it certainly is an effort to silence and intimidate Jack Smith. I mean, he's been very clear about the pressure that he feels he's under, and the people who work for him have been fired and purged from the Justice Department. I just fear that it could be more than that, that we could actually see a criminal case arise from this, because we've seen that kind of thing before. And this Justice Department has proven itself capable of contorting itself to file criminal charges against the president's enemies. And there's no greater enemy, let's face it, in Donald Trump's mind than Jack Smith, the man who did try to put him in prison. That was Jack Smith's intention. Let's not, make no bones about it. He filed very serious criminal charges, and he has said publicly since then that he believes Donald Trump was guilty of those charges. He could have proven those charges in court, and they very possibly could have resulted in a prison sentence for Donald Trump. So, I fear that it's more than a PR campaign. And to your earlier point, you're absolutely right. Of course, this was disclosed to Donald Trump's lawyers. In discovery, all the relevant documents in a criminal investigation have to be turned over to the defense. That's part of our system. So the idea that they're just discovering this now, the Republicans, and that it's this grave scandal, it just doesn't seem logical.
And Senator Grassley released some of it. Okay, so release some of the correspondence about it. Talk to us about what happens next year. What do you have many stories you're covering in this Justice Department, but what are you watching for? What are the things that could happen next year?
Well, we'll watch for signs of a grand jury investigating this matter. And, grand juries are secret, so we're reading tea leaves, and we may hear from people inside the Justice Department who are very concerned about these kinds of political cases. Sometimes we learn about these kinds of things from people that are very upset about them, and so that's what we'll do. We'll report it out, and we'll look for any signs that they are actually conducting a criminal investigation that could result in charges against Jack Smith. Jack Smith's lawyers may hear about it. There may be witnesses brought in. Those are the kinds of things that we'll watch for, because again, this is going on all the time. They're all manner of people that came into Donald Trump's crosshairs that he views as a political enemy who are being investigated at this moment by the Justice Department.
Ken Dilanian, thank you as always for your tireless reporting and being able to consume and digest things so quickly. We appreciate it.
We have more now on that breaking news that my colleague Jen Psaki broke last hour. House Judiciary Chairman Jim Jordan has issued a criminal referral of former special prosecutor Jack Smith, accusing Smith of lying to Congress. In the referral letter obtained by MS Now, Jordan claims that Jack Smith misled Congress about how, quote, during the special counsel investigation, investigators unconstitutionally subpoenaed phone records for over a dozen Republican members of Congress and obtained gag orders to prevent the members from knowing that in May 2022, investigators in the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Columbia began seeking subpoenas for members' phone records because these members spoke with certain executive branch officials. Of course, those records of communications between Republican members of Congress and the Trump White House were part of the federal investigation into the violent attack on the Capitol and Donald Trump's attempt to overthrow the results of the 2020 election. Tonight, a representative for Jack Smith responded. The House Judiciary Committee's referral to the Department of Justice of our client, Jack Smith, is based on a spurious claim that Mr. Smith provided false testimony during his 8-hour deposition before the House Judiciary Committee. The referral is made not because Mr. Smith made a false statement, which the letter concedes, but because he did not proactively disclose information that was not responsive to a question asked. During his testimony, Mr. Smith provided truthful, responsive answers and candidly discussed his work as special counsel. This referral reflects a chilling eagerness to weaponize the justice system by attacking a career, nonpartisan public servant who faithfully and fearlessly performed his duties by following the facts and the law. Jim Jordan's Democratic counterpart on the committee, Congressman Jamie Raskin, was a little less measured in his response tonight, saying, quote, this referral, if ever brought before a judge, will get laughed out of court. But success on the merits is not the goal. It is meant to harass Jack Smith. It is meant to please their Fox News viewership. It is meant to whitewash their own participation in a scheme to overthrow our elections. And above all, it is meant to create a distraction so Republicans on Senate Judiciary can feel just a little more comfortable confirming the architect of the Epstein cover-up and lawless Trump slush fund and super pardon, Todd Blanche, to the post of Attorney General. We will not fall for this ludicrous distraction, neither will the American people, unquote. Joining us now to discuss is Congressman James Walkinshaw, Democrat of Virginia. He is a member of the House Oversight Committee. So, Congressman, your colleague Jamie Raskin says that this referral would be, quote, laughed out of court. Do you agree with that assessment?
Yeah, I think absolutely. Look, Jack Smith was asked if he obtained text messages via toll records, and the answer was no. What Jim Jordan didn't know and should have known is that a lot of those text messages exist in the National Archive as part of the presidential record, and Jack Smith was able to get access to some of them that way. Jim Jordan didn't ask that question. Shoddy work by him in the deposition. But this referral is a joke. And just like many of the other politicized prosecutions that Todd Blanche has taken into courtrooms, it's going to get thrown out.
If Democrats win control of the House, do you think that your committee should investigate Congressman Jordan's actions here as an abuse of power?
Well, look, Jim Jordan and other congressional Republicans were part of Donald Trump's scheme to overturn the results of a free and fair election in 2020. Jim Jordan is also one of those Republicans who defied a congressional subpoena to answer questions about his role in January 6th and his role in an effort to overturn the election. So there needs to be accountability for all of that. Folks involved in that need to answer questions about their role and their efforts to overturn a free and fair election.
Well, so to clarify, does that mean that you think that if Democrats retake the House, it is appropriate to launch an investigation of your colleague Jim Jordan for potentially abusing his power? What is accountability?
I think we're going to, yeah, look, I think we will have to investigate the weaponization of the Justice Department under this Trump administration. And to the extent that members of Congress are aiding and abetting that weaponization, the effort to harass a career public servant like Jack Smith, efforts to harass other nonpartisan, non-political public servants who did their job to try to find justice around January 6th and other illegal actions by Donald Trump and his administration, all of that will need to be investigated.
You talk about the retribution here from potentially the DOJ and or your colleagues on the other side of the aisle in Congress. Do you think it will give pause to future civil servants considering taking up important but divisive independent roles like this or other important roles in law enforcement? I'm thinking about the efforts to persecute/prosecute people like James Comey. What do you think the net effect is on incentives to serve your country, given that this kind of fate may be awaiting you?
It's such an important question. You know, I represent 50,000 dedicated federal employees in my district in Virginia, folks who put the Constitution and their service to the American people ahead of loyalty to any politician, whether it's Donald Trump or anyone else. They take their patriotism very, very seriously. Clearly, there's an effort to intimidate folks like that. They've been fired, they've been pushed out, they've been harassed, they've been referred for prosecution. But I have deep and abiding faith in the patriotism of the American people and the dedicated public servants who serve across the government in non-political roles. And I'm confident that despite this effort to intimidate them, they're going to continue to do their jobs now and into the future.
Congressman James Walkinshaw, thanks so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for having me.
It is Wednesday, July the 22nd, 104 days until the midterm elections. And tonight, House Republicans are turning up the heat on one of Donald Trump's top perceived political enemies. MS Now has obtained a letter sent by Jim Jordan, the chair of the House Judiciary Committee, referring the former special counsel Jack Smith to the Justice Department for criminal charges. Smith has long been a target of Trump. He served as the special prosecutor, you'll remember, who indicted Trump twice back in 2023, including for trying to steal the 2020 election. Jordan's letter to the Department of Justice alleges that the House has, quote, strong evidence, end quote, that Smith, quote, seemingly made willfully and intentionally false statements of material fact that contradict new documents obtained by the committee from the Department of Justice, end quote. Okay, this is where it gets interesting, even for us non-lawyers. The allegation focuses on one particular line of questioning from a closed-door deposition that Jack Smith took part in back in December. It involves whether or not Smith sought search warrants for congressional members' text messages. Now, during the deposition, Smith said that he did not. He only requested something called toll records. Now, toll records, we all have them. They're basically logs of when calls were made. They do not show the content of any messages or communications. They're basically a list of phone numbers, who you called, and I think how long you talked to them. So here's how the exchange in question went. Question: did you seek a search warrant for the content of any text messages from members? Smith: from members? Question: yes. Smith: no, I don't recall that. Question: okay, it was just toll records? Smith: correct. Okay, it goes on. Question: did the toll records that you requested from the senators, did they include the content of the phone calls? Smith: no. Question: did the records that you requested, the toll records from members of Congress, include the content of text messages? Smith: no. Okay. The discrepancy here, according to Jordan's criminal referral, is that the Justice Department produced documents this month that showed that Smith's team did obtain text messages from dozens of lawmakers. But we know where those text messages came from, and it wasn't because Smith sought search warrants. Those text messages were exchanged between lawmakers and the White House. They were preserved as part of Donald Trump's presidential records at the National Archives, which is where Smith's team got them from. The Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin, the ranking member on the House Judiciary Committee, said that the referral will be, quote, laughed out of court, end quote. Meanwhile, a representative for Jack Smith's team tells MS Now, quote, the House Judiciary Committee's referral to the Department of Justice of our client, Jack Smith, is based on a spurious claim that Mr. Smith provided false testimony during his 8-hour deposition before the House Judiciary Committee. The referral is made not because Mr. Smith made a false statement, which the letter concedes, but because he did not proactively disclose information that was not responsive to a question asked. During his testimony, Mr. Smith provided truthful, responsive answers and candidly discussed his work as special counsel. This referral reflects a chilling eagerness to weaponize the justice system by attacking a career, nonpartisan public servant who faithfully and fearlessly performed his duties by following the facts and the law, end quote. And that is where my legal expertise ends and Barbara McQuaid's begins. So joining us is Barbara McQuaid, the former United States Attorney for Michigan. She's a law professor at the University of Michigan Law School and an MS Now legal analyst. Adam Mockler joins us as well. He's a digital journalist and a political commentator who's built up a following of 2 million subscribers online. And, of course, the reason he's here is that this is only half a legal story. The rest of it is entirely politics. Thanks to both of you for being with us. Barbara, let's start with you. I've read you what I know. Can you tell us what that means?
Yes, I think there is a real disconnect between what Jack Smith said and what the committee is referring to as a criminal investigation. To prove a claim of false statements before Congress, you have to show that a person then and there made a false statement that they knew was false. The question is literally true, what he said. Did you use a search warrant to obtain these records? And he says, no, that's accurate. What Jim Jordan says in his letter is that, well, this was deliberately misleading. He answered a question, a literal question, and he answered it literally. The documents, as you point out, that Jack Smith ultimately received came from a request to the National Archives for White House text messages, and they came in that form. And so it does not appear that Jack Smith and his team ever used their own court process to obtain the content of messages from members of Congress. It matters that it's literally a true statement.
Adam Mockler, here's the thing. Donald Trump, people sometimes loosely call people Donald Trump's enemies. Jack Smith's not Donald Trump's enemy. Letitia James, not Donald Trump's enemy. He claims that anybody who goes after him on a legal basis is an enemy. He's got perceived enemies. It is, in his world, everybody's an enemy. This is not. Jack Smith had two very thorough indictments that were not pursued as a result of a Supreme Court decision protecting Donald Trump. But they are determined to go after Jack Smith and Letitia James and James Comey and folks like that, largely to put a chill on anyone who would criticize Donald Trump or investigate him.
Yeah, it seems like the Trump admin is desperately trying to pull some sleight of hand to divert people's attention away from the fact that Donald Trump lost the 2020 election. He lost it, and he cannot cope with that fact. So 6 years later, he's spreading lies about it, and he escaped any accountability because Jack Smith's case ended up fizzling out after Trump became the president. But Jack Smith had a rock-solid case, and Donald Trump is scared of that. It's funny, Jim Jordan, who sent this request to the DOJ, ended up saying that this was a separation of powers issue. I didn't hear any complaining about the separation of powers when Trump was directly requesting that the DOJ, that Pam Bondi investigate Adam Schiff or Letitia James. I didn't hear any complaining about separation of powers when Trump blew past that 60-day war mark and pushed the war powers resolution aside. There was no separation of powers complaining when Donald Trump placed tariffs on every single country. He has stepped and squashed all over the separation of powers that wouldn't make it okay for anyone else to do it. But as Barbara pointed out, nobody else did that. Jack Smith was just running an investigation into an election that Donald Trump tried to steal from the American people.
Barbara, it is important where evidence comes from, right? Like, this is a real thing. Donald Trump, Jack Smith had a way of getting this information. And by the way, this is important for all of us to know, that one may never get a subpoena against you, against Adam Mockler for his text. But if somebody subpoenas somebody who Adam Mockler was texting with, they may get their hands on that text. The specificity here matters. Jim Jordan is alleging that Jack Smith broke the law. That's very different from Jack Smith using other methods to get the information that he was using as part of his attempt to prosecute Donald Trump.
Absolutely right, because what they're accusing Jack Smith of here is lying to Congress, and he did no such thing. He conceded that he did obtain the toll records of members of Congress, and this is, by the way, a routine step that is done in criminal investigations. Figuring out who is talking to whom is very important when you're trying to put together a conspiracy case. So the fact that he sought those records is in no way improper. In fact, even if he had used search warrants to obtain those records, I'm not sure that would have been improper. Nonetheless, because of this respect for separation of powers, people use a very delicate hand when looking at these things, very similar to the way they look at press records, only as a last resort. But in this case, they did not seek the content of the records of any member of Congress. Instead, what they were looking at is White House records. And these members of Congress put themselves out there by reaching out or communicating with the White House. They then go on to talk about there was no filter team used here. They waived any privilege they might have had by communicating by text message with the White House outside of the scope of their congressional teams.
Adam Mockler, what's the goal here? Donald Trump's unpopular. Every day a new poll comes out and he reaches lower levels of popularity. He's got this war with Iran. He's now talking, I mean, it's unbelievable to me. He's talking about tariffs again. All the things that Americans don't want, even a lot of his supporters don't want. But boy, if you ever crossed Donald Trump, particularly if you were a lawyer or a prosecutor of some sort, you are in the crosshairs now, whether it's about mortgages or parking tickets or in this case, Jim Jordan's making it sound like a serious matter about perjury, about lying to Congress. But in fact, it kind of doesn't matter. If you were involved in investigating Donald Trump, from being the lowest level FBI agent to being Jack Smith himself, they're coming for you.
Well, you pointed it out perfectly earlier. He's trying to create a chilling effect. We have seen this administration surgically target any institution that can act as a check on the president, even beyond the separation of powers of Congress and the DOJ and the presidency. There is the fact that Donald Trump has targeted colleges, law firms, as you pointed out. He's attacked media corporations. He's even gone after independent creators. He has this whole website on the whitehouse.gov listing off independent creators on YouTube and online who have gone after him. but these are just people reporting the news. Donald Trump tries to create an atmosphere of fear around anybody who actually wants to act as a democratic check or balance. And I just want to return to this fact. Trump lost the 2020 election. He's trying to relitigate it 6 years later while simultaneously try to rig the midterms via gerrymandering and striking down the Voting Rights Act and pushing to radically gerrymander. And they're just trying to play sleight of hand. It's like a clever way to try to project onto the other side and say, look, the other side is incredibly corrupt. Meanwhile, they are the ones trying to pull the wool over our eyes while they rig this next election.
I will say, though, Barbara, Jack Smith is he was a judge and a lawyer. James Comey is well equipped to handle these things, and John Brennan is well equipped to handle these things, and Tish James is well equipped to handle these things, sort of. Right? I mean, these are lawyers. They know other lawyers. If they have to go to federal court, they can find someone. The average person can't do that. But the chilling effect is the same, right? The idea is if you go after these big, powerful names, the point is we can go after any of you.
Absolutely right. And although, if Jack Smith were to be charged with a crime for this conduct, I have no doubt he would prevail at trial, if not getting this case dismissed with a motion. But just being charged with a crime is a very burdensome thing for anybody. It puts them through the ringer. There is the expense of hiring lawyers. There is the reputational harm of people who casually read this and don't pay attention to the details and believe he did something wrong. There's the emotional toll on oneself and one's family and the distraction from everyday life or one's career. So just being charged alone would be burdensome to anyone, including Jack Smith. But I think you're right. It's like when you get into prison, you beat up the biggest guy because then everybody's afraid to mess with you. And so if you go after people like Jim Comey or Letitia James or Jack Smith, what are the rest of us supposed to do? I think the idea is you should keep your head down. You should not speak up. You should not complain. You should not criticize the president, because if you do, you could end up just like these other people.
With the integrity of the Justice Department on the line, let's bring in MS Now legal analyst and former clerk to Judge Sonia Sotomayor, Melissa Murray, former federal prosecutor Brendan Ballou, who tried January 6th cases, and MS Now senior investigative reporter Carol Leonnig. I am confused by the timing here. Carol Leonnig, Todd Blanche already has a rocky confirmation process. Why throw this loyalty test into the mix?
Well, one of the things that Todd Blanche learned upon being named acting Attorney General when Donald Trump fired his first choice, Pam Bondi, was that as soon as he fast-tracked weaponized political investigations, Donald Trump was pretty excited about nominating him to take the job permanently. And so I think for Todd Blanche, having the chance to indict Jack Smith, the former special prosecutor who brought two pretty powerful cases against Donald Trump involving classified documents and an effort to obstruct and block the certification of the election. The idea of pleasing Donald Trump in that way would only further help his standing with the president. I don't think there are a lot of members of Congress, actually, that are angry about the idea of Jack Smith being tarred and feathered publicly either. It's a different set of questions than, for example, what Senator Tillis or Senator Cornyn have asked. What's just really shocking here, Alicia, is that Jim Jordan believes there is strong evidence that appears to indicate a crime. We all read the English language. We all know what Jack Smith was asked, and he answered it accurately. I mean, I wrote a whole chapter of a book about this, and his answer about the actual toll records is pristinely correct.
Brendan, I remember talking to folks on the committee at the time that they were interviewing Smith about why Republicans wanted this done behind closed doors. One, because they wanted to suss out what Jack Smith was going to say so they could decide what was politically damaging to them versus what was politically advantageous. Even Dems would concede that was smart strategy at the time, but also because they wanted the possibility of setting traps for him, of having testimony that had gaps, that had discrepancies. But in this case, do the merits even matter here? Does DOJ go forward with it regardless?
It's tough to say. Obviously, as Carol was saying, the acting attorney general has a strong incentive to try to bring an indictment here. It seems crucial to his relationship with the president and his advancement professionally. But it's a tough case to bring. It's pretty clear that Jack Smith was truthful in his testimony. He was asked if the search warrant sought the contents of members of Congress's communications and their cell phones. He said that they didn't, and they didn't. The fact that these same communications were available in the National Archives, I think as Representative Jamie Raskin has pointed out, is frankly something of an embarrassing surprise to members of Congress. And so at some level, they might be reacting to their own sort of shock at this. It might be possible for the administration to secure an indictment here, if you sort of frame this up in enough legalese and, try to sort of obfuscate what the question was, maybe they can secure an indictment. But even there, if this is brought in the District of Columbia, where it almost certainly would have to be, grand juries have been incredibly skeptical of this Department of Justice, so they might even struggle there. But even if they did get an indictment, this is, it's just so obvious that Jack Smith was telling the truth and answering the question. This might not even get to a trial or to a plea because it could just get dismissed on a motion to dismiss. The judge could just say on their own initiative that there's not enough evidence to bring a case here. So I think it would be, it's possible for them to bring a case. I think it's almost impossible for them to win.
Right. I mean, Melissa Murray, what we've seen over and over again is that the outcome seems sort of secondary to those pursuing these cases. The pain of the process is the whole point. I want to read to you just a little bit more of Smith's team's response. They say this referral, quote, relies on the unprecedented theory that Mr. Smith provided false testimony, not because of what he said, but because of what he did not say. Specifically, the referral argues that by not proactively disclosing that the special counsel's office collected from the National Archives records from White House phones that included text messages, Mr. Smith violated the federal false statements statute. That's a lot of legalese there. I want you to unpack it for me. My understanding is you have Congressman Jordan saying Smith lied by omission, and you have Smith's team saying, no, the lawmakers asked the wrong questions.
I mean, that's basically it in a nutshell. You cannot provide a false statement to a question that has not been directly asked in the way that Mr. Smith's lawyers are saying. And so he's provided information for the questions that were asked, and he's done so under oath. And, to Carol's point, he answered correctly. And so there's that. Could I go back, though, and just maybe add a little more legal color to the whole question of what's in it for Todd Blanche? Todd Blanche, who has been auditioning to be the AG for some time now, can serve in this capacity under the Federal Vacancies Act as long as his nomination is pending. He has a 210-day service that he could elapse unless the nomination has been brought to the Senate. It has been brought to the Senate, which means the time frame for the Vacancy Act is tolled, which means as long as he is still the nominee and it's pending before the Senate, even if the Senate doesn't take it up and vote on it, as long as it's not withdrawn by the president and the Senate doesn't vote on it, he can serve indefinitely. The period is tolled at this point. And so that really underscores the point that Todd Blanche is playing and performing for an audience of one. And that one audience has one thing in mind, and it's retribution. So it's not surprising that this was teed up for Todd Blanche. It also, I think, conveniently provides cover for people like Thom Tillis and John Cornyn, who have expressed some doubts about Blanche's nomination. This is a huge distraction. And if they vote for him, a lot of this may go under the water as we focus on the DOJ prosecuting Jack Smith.
Right. I mean, because, Carol, let's not lose sight of what these records were about. People were potentially communicating about how to overturn an election. This wasn't a fishing expedition.
Absolutely correct. I'm glad you brought up that point, because I remember when Senator Grassley sort of famously several months ago, quote unquote, released this amazing explosive information suggesting that the toll records, well, first suggesting that members of Congress had been spied on because their toll records were sought, which is something that happens multiple times a day at the Department of Justice's instruction when they're investigating something and trying to find out who called who, when did they call them. You don't learn the content of those phone calls. You're just learning, who called who. It happened to be absolutely essential to learn who Donald Trump was calling on the day of January 6th when he was refusing his staff's entreaties, including his White House counsel, including several of his deputies, including his chief of staff, entreaties for him to do something to stop the violence that his supporters were basically executing at the Capitol to try to block the certification of a free and fair election. Those phone calls were overwhelmingly to Republicans. No shock there. But when this was released by Senator Grassley as some great smoking gun about the corruption of special counsel Jack Smith's investigation, nothing could have been further from the truth. Republicans' toll records were gathered because Donald Trump called Republicans. It's not really a surprise.
To your point about this not being a surprise, Jack Smith has said he thought a prosecution could be coming with or without this referral. I want you all to take a listen to him on with Nicole Wallace earlier this month.
Do you expect to be indicted?
Listen, Donald Trump has made a bunch of statements.
He said he would indict you, yes.
I'll tell you, Nicole, I honestly do not spend a lot of time thinking about the things he says about me and his threats about me. I'm real focused on the people who I worked with, looking out for them. I'm real focused on how the Justice Department's going to be better going forward.
Are you afraid to be speaking out?
No, not at all. I am not going to be intimidated. And there's no way in the world, if the thought was to go after me so that I wouldn't speak up about the corruption that's happening or speak up to defend these agents and prosecutors, that is a grave miscalculation.
Brendan, prosecutors usually try to let the work speak for itself. Is that an option anymore? Do people like Smith now have to make the case publicly in this new political reality?
Well, I certainly hope that they do. You know, Jack Smith carries an enormous amount of credibility, both in the public and, among lawyers. So I hope that he uses this opportunity to speak out more. And I think it will be obviously a necessity if he in fact gets indicted. I also think it's a necessity whether or not he goes in the media that he go on the offensive legally here. This would obviously be ripe for a motion for selective or vindictive prosecution. And the idea that he's being prosecuted because of his beliefs or his allegiances, not because of any crime that he committed. That idea of selective or vindictive prosecution is ultimately derives from the constitutional right to equal protection and due process. And, his constitutional rights are arguably being violated here. I hope that his lawyers think about bringing an offensive case if he is indicted for a constitutional violation for which he can get injunction, for which he can get damages. And I think that will help shift the narrative, too.
Melissa, I understand the question I am going to ask maybe sounds naive or quaint, but Todd Blanche was Donald Trump's lawyer in the Jack Smith case. Does that require then a responsibility to recuse himself from this case at DOJ?
I think in ordinary times, most lawyers, to be cautious, would, one, surface the association with the earlier litigation and then attempt to recuse or to seek advice or counsel about whether or not to recuse. But I don't think we are in ordinary times. And I think it's unlikely that Todd Blanche is going to do that. We already saw Todd Blanche last week talk about the fact that he is Donald Trump's personal lawyer, hard to say. And I think given the nature of the association and the person who has been his client may continue to be his client, I think it's unlikely that we're going to see the kinds of steps we ordinarily might see.